On September 11, 2001, the largest terror attack in history took place in the United States of America. The terrorist group Al-Qaeda coordinated the hijacking of 4 commercial aircraft and planned to crash all 4 into important buildings in the New York and Washington, D.C. area. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 4 aircraft used in these attacks. The first flight to take off was American Airlines Flight 11, which was a scheduled service between Boston, Logan, and Los Angeles, departing Logan at 7:59 a.m. The aircraft being used for Flight 11 was a Boeing 767-200ER. American Airlines started flying the Boeing 767s in 1982 with a fleet of 11 767-200s, 29 767-200ERs, and 67 767-300ERs. The 767-200ER was introduced to the American fleet in 1984 and was retired in 2014. The registration of the aircraft used in the attack was November 334 Alpha Alpha and had arrived in from San Francisco the evening before. It was built in Everett, Washington in 1987, and at the time of the attack it was a 14-year-old aircraft and was the 4th fatal loss of a Boeing 767. The second aircraft to take off was United Airlines Flight 175, which was a scheduled service again between Boston, Logan, and Los Angeles, departing Logan at 8:14 a.m. Both American 11 and United 175 would compete with service operating flights at the same time and with a similar capacity. The aircraft being used for Flight 175 was a Boeing 767-200. United Airlines started flying the Boeing 767s in 1982 with a fleet of 36 767-200s. While United also flew the 767-200ERs, they would only end up operating these aircraft between 2010 and 2013 after their acquisition of Continental Airlines in 2010. United also still flies some variants of the 767, still having 37 767-300ERs and 16 767-400ERs in their fleet. The 767-200 was introduced to the United fleet in 1982 and was retired in 2005. The registration of the aircraft used in the attack was November 612 Uniform Alpha and was built in Everett, Washington in 1983. At the time of the attack, it was an 18-year-old aircraft and was the 5th fatal loss of a Boeing 767. The third flight to take off was American Airlines Flight 77, which was a scheduled service between Washington, Dallas, and Los Angeles, departing Dallas at 8:20 a.m. The aircraft being used for Flight 77 was a Boeing 757-200. American Airlines had a fleet of 177 757s and flew them from 1989 to 2020. The registration of the aircraft used in the attack was November 644 Alpha Alpha and was built in Renton, Washington in 1991. At the time of the attack, it was a 10-year-old aircraft and was the 7th fatal loss of a Boeing 757. The 4th and final flight to depart was United Airlines Flight 93, which was a scheduled service between Newark Liberty and San Francisco, departing with a delay from Newark at 8:42 a.m. after being scheduled for an 8 a.m. departure. It's likely that this delay would lead to a lot fewer people being killed. The aircraft being used for Flight 93 was again a Boeing 757-200. United have operated a total of 139 757-200s, however 38 of these came from United's acquisition of Continental Airlines in 2010. All of the aircraft originally purchased by United have now been retired, with only ex-Continental aircraft remaining in service today. United also currently have a fleet of 21 757-300s, and United's first 757 entered service with the airline in 1989. The registration of the aircraft used in the attack was November 591 Uniform Alpha and was built in Renton, Washington in 1996. It was the newest aircraft used during the attacks at just 5 years old and was the 6th fatal loss of a Boeing 757. United Airlines Flight 93 departed at 8:42, which was only 4 minutes before American Airlines Flight 11 crashed. 28 minutes before that, the 5 terrorists on board Flight 11 who were seated in first and business class hijacked the aircraft using box cutters. It's suspected that the hijackers cut 3 passengers, potentially killing them. They also had a fake explosive strapped to one of their chests and sprayed mace into the cabin. These were both to prevent any passenger uprising. After diverting from their original flight plan, the terrorists made multiple transmissions to ATC. These were likely to delay any mitigation from the air traffic controllers.
Is that American 11 trying to call?
Buddy, we have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're heading to the airport.
And who's trying to call me here? American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Let's stay quiet.
Despite this, 2 F-15 Eagles were dispatched from Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts, but it was a little too late, as the F-15s took off 7 minutes after American 11 had already hit its target. American 11 was the first aircraft to take off and the first to reach its target being the North World Trade Center Tower in New York City. It hit the first tower at 8:46 a.m., traveling at 465 miles an hour, hitting the building between the 93rd and 99th floors, killing hundreds instantly. American 11 was carrying 76 passengers and 11 crew. 4 minutes before the first crash, the 5 terrorists on board United Airlines Flight 175 hijacked their aircraft in a similar fashion. As the aircraft deviated from its original flight plan, the aircraft came within 200 feet of Delta Airlines Flight 2315 operating from Hartford to Tampa, which almost caused a mid-air collision. United 175 hit the second tower at 9:03 a.m., traveling at 500 miles an hour, hitting the building between the 77th and 85th floors, which was slightly lower than American 11. United 175 was carrying 51 passengers and 9 crew. 12 minutes before the second crash, the 5 terrorists on board American Airlines Flight 77 hijacked their aircraft. However, what separates this hijacking from the rest is no one was killed before the crash, with even the pilots being sent to the rear of the cabin. The hijackers also had a poor understanding of how the PA system worked, meaning they ended up transmitting their PA announcement to ATC, allowing ATC to realize that this was the third aircraft that had been hijacked. American 77 was the first aircraft not to hit New York and instead hit the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C. at 9:37 a.m. Hitting the Pentagon building was symbolic more than it was designed to be deadly. While the World Trade Center attacks killed 2,763 people, the attacks on the Pentagon would only end up killing 125 people on the ground. American 77 was carrying 53 passengers and 6 crew. The outlier of the September 11th attacks would then be the final aircraft to be hijacked, United Airlines Flight 93. After a 42-minute delay on the ground, United 93 was already behind schedule, and it's suspected that the hijackers got nervous as they waited another 46 minutes before hijacking the aircraft, compared to American Flight 11, which was hijacked only 15 minutes after takeoff. The aircraft was hijacked at 9:28, which was only 9 minutes before American 77 crashed into the Pentagon. At this point, all other flights in the US had been ordered to land, and along with struggling transmissions from the pilots, it was clear that United 93 had also been hijacked.
They want to swing them up.
Because United 93 was running behind, the passengers started to learn about the other attacks and decided to retaliate. On top of being behind schedule, the terrorists were also at a disadvantage, as United 93 was the only flight with 4 hijackers while all the other flights had 5. United 93's target has never been confirmed, however, due to the aircraft heading towards the DC area and information divulged from a meeting in which the attacks were planned, it's most likely that the Capitol building was the target. Among other suggested targets were a nuclear facility, Camp David, and the White House. During a struggle between the passengers and the hijackers, United 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing no one on the ground. United 93 was carrying 33 passengers and 7 crew. In total, 2,996 people died as a result of the September 11th attacks, including the 19 hijackers. Thanks to the heroic efforts of the passengers on board United 93, these deaths could have been a lot higher. 2,606 people died on the ground in New York City, while only 125 people died on the ground in Washington, D.C., with over 10% of those that died on the ground being police officers and firefighters. 9/11 also overtook Pearl Harbor as the largest foreign attack on US soil. A terrorist plan of this size would have had to be planned for years, and it was. The plans were first proposed to bin Laden in the year of 1996, and in 1998, after the African embassy bombings, the plans for what was codenamed the Big Wedding began. The basic idea of flying large planes into large buildings was the core of the plans, but which buildings took a little longer for them to decide. In an original plan for the attacks, 10 planes would have been hijacked and flown into various targets such as nuclear facilities, the US Bank Tower in Los Angeles, and even have one aircraft land back at an airport and have all the male passengers executed. However, this plan was deemed too complex and was scaled back. In 1999, Mohammed Atta was selected as the leader for the attacks. He was selected because he was dedicated, well-educated, educated and had experience living in the West. He would end up being the hijacker to fly American 11 into the first tower. While many types of aircraft were in commercial service in the United States, it's interesting that the hijackers specifically targeted the Boeing 757 and 767, which have very similar flight characteristics. While you don't need a wealth of knowledge to crash a plane, the hijackers would have had to learn the basics, like disabling autopilot, and have basic knowledge of how the aircraft would fly. In the year 2000, the first hijackers arrived in the US. These would be the hijackers to fly the aircraft, so they used this time to take lessons in flight schools around the US, in California, Arizona, and Oklahoma. The FBI even got a call from a flight school based on suspicious questions one of their students were asking. However, this lead never unfortunately developed into an investigation. It's clear the terrorists specifically targeted these high-demand coast-to-coast flights, as these were popular and used some of the largest commercial aircraft in domestic use. While I can find no link to the hijackers specifically targeting the Boeing 757 and 767, I think what they were trying to go for is size. Less for capitalizing on the number of people on board, as all these flights had very few passengers, but instead the fuel and overall destructive power of these larger aircraft. While hijackings of aircraft have happened in the past, none have ended up as deadly as the attacks on September 11th. The World Trade Center site took 9 months to clear, and the last fire was put out 100 days after the attack. To one of the flights at the airports the aircraft left from, an American flag now flies above the gates the aircraft involved in 9/11 departed from. The attacks on September 11th prompted the invasion of Afghanistan, which is to this date the longest war in US history, lasting just short of 20 years. This war has killed almost as many US citizens as 9/11 itself, with 2,420 US soldiers killed. But when taking into account the Afghan army and allied countries like the UK and Canada, over 76,000 soldiers lost their lives. However, even worse than this, the civilian deaths are estimated at over 46,000, with total losses as a result of the war being over 212,000 people. This year we remember the 22nd anniversary of this day that will be forever remembered.